Good morning. So I'm going to talk a little bit about white box. MMM, right? That's missiles, magic, movement, then melee. That is the combat order. Of course, it has alternate rules, and of course, is very clear. It's saying make it your own. But rules is written combat. When the party of adventurers comes into contact with enemies, the order of events of combat round is as follows. This is a combat round, so different than a turn. The referee determines if one side or the other is entitled to a free attack or move as a result of surprise, right? This is either a judgment or a die roll. And of course, for surprise, I rolled the D6, 1 or 2. They were surprised. The werebeast had been surprised. And then at the camp, they were surprised. Brother Tim was on watch and was surprised. Okay. Determine initiative. One roll is made for each side. Not for individuals in combat, right? This is what we did. The party with initiative acts first. Missile, magic, movement, then melee. And we followed this MMMM, right? You have a chance to launch missiles. You have a chance to cast if prepared. Okay, so I should talk about this. So you can missile if you have a bow in hand or if you are prepared, right? So you can't draw your weapon and fire, right? So in the first round, you have to have a bow in hand to missile first. You cannot cast unless you are ready to cast, right? So this becomes important tactical stuff in this old school game. So again, a pretty minor, but when we start looking at those things tactically, even in theater of the mind, because again, there's no reference at all to maps and minis here, but the order in which you would do things or in which things occur become tactical in and of themselves. So again, you have to have a bow or crossbow or whatever ready to fire. You have to have a spell actually ready to cast. If not, to prepare a spell takes a full round. And this is something I think most people hand wave. They just cast them like their video game. You mash a button. No, they have to actually conjure and cast the spell. So they need a round to do that. So if they're ready with sleep on the cat move on the magic portion of that first round, they can cast sleep. But then they have to prepare magic missile a full round to prepare. Okay. Then of course there's movement. You can't have melee without movement, and movement's going to occur first, right? Because then it allows for melee to occur. Even if you're in melee, movement would come first, allowing you to try to move out of melee or try to flee before the melee round. And here's why I think many GMs get in trouble, right? That free attack, they allow an attack, then the players move out and they get another attack. Well, imagine if you did this properly and everybody on the movement phase said, we're fleeing. Then the enemy would get their melee attack. They would move out of melee, and the enemy wouldn't get a second free attack. They would get their normal attack, but the other side has decided to disengage from melee. They just don't get their melee attack. So it's not a free attack. If you follow these procedures properly, they don't get that free attack in old school, right? They get their normal melee attack as you are fleeing combat or moving out of engaged melee. So it's not a free attack. It's a normal melee attack. It's just you wouldn't attack first. So on melee, I say, hey, on my turn, I'm moving out of melee. I don't want to be in this. Now we go to melee, and the goblin against me would get his normal attack. I had said I was moving out, therefore I'm disengaging, right? So if we do these things and we pay attention to these orders, we do get tactical, even theater of the mind combat. But more importantly, if we're doing this right, we're not hand waving this stuff away. Magic doesn't become too willy-nilly. The missile, for instance, this game, it is important because missile weapons have a rate of fire. And this is another thing. When you are not in melee, you can missile. But if you're in melee, you can no longer missile, right? That's why we identify missile versus melee. So once you're engaged in melee, you're not going to be able to use your bow. Now you can use your bow as a club and smack the enemy, etc. That's up to you. But that rate of fire is important when you choose tactically to stay out of melee, right? And I think this creates these really remarkable old school combats, regardless of maps and minis, regardless of the simple D20 roll, right? We can see how there's some evidence here. So that's the basic combat procedure, right? Surprise, if any, right? It can either be GM fiat or we roll the die. I always roll the die. Again, I don't want to make these conscious decisions. Now, there could be a moment in a game where you're against an invisible opponent. You have no idea that opponent's there, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, you're surprised when this thing hits you or tries to hit you, right? So there could be these moments where you're up against an invisible opponent. Obviously, rolling surprises kind of, well, it could still happen. You could still hear them or something, right? You could still feel the breathing or something if it's depending on the situation. Okay, then we determine initiative and we go. Now, intent, there's optional intent that they all have to state their intent, but that's optional. And I personally I really don't want to do that, right? They need to state their intent if they're going to prepare another spell, all right? If they're going to reload their crossbow, right? They need to state their intent, right? So I think that is important, right? If they don't say, hey, I'm preparing the magic missile, and we get to the next round and he says, I'm casting magic missile, I'll say, whoa, you need a round to do that. You fired, you needed to, you need to state that. But you can do that, by the way, after you cast sleep, you can say, now I'm preparing magic missile for the next round. So you would have that full round. You're just not going to move. You're not going to melee. Well, hopefully you're not going to melee. Initiative is just a simple D6 roll. Highest side wins. There's an alternate combat sequence, optional. Roll for surprise, etc. Roll for initiative, right? First, prepared spells are cast. So now we can move that magic in front of missiles, and then movement, then melee, right? So it's just changing slightly what would go first, missile or magic. Because missile has, many of these missile weapons have 2 rate of fire. They can shoot twice, right? It makes total sense. Missile goes first, bang, draw, bang. And then whoever's casting is obviously going through the machinations of casting that spell. Then we're going to move and we're going to melee. And this is important to me, and it's important to me as a GM now, especially as I do things more rules as written. It's important to differentiate the difference between white box from basic fantasy, or white box from sword and wizardry, or white box from Moldvay, OSC, right? They are slightly different, but they matter. And if we do this, it becomes very interesting. So for instance, their Werebeast battle the other night, because missile came before melee, they were able to throw rocks at the creature on. Now, even if they lose initiative, we first do missile. So yeah, the Werebeast won initiative, but it's not using missile. It's in a melee. So we're going to go to the first. Then it declines missile. They get to go missile. So the 2 that weren't in melee threw rocks at it. If they were successful, I would lower this to hit by 1 as a taunt or a deterrent. And then, of course, we go to magic. Well, no one was using magic. Then we go to movement. Of course, they're engaged in melee. So either I would move out of, well, I never had to move out. I mean, the goal was just to attack whoever was attacking. And also, once I engage, once this ferocious beast engaged one of the players randomly, I just randomly rolled who he went after, Charles or Brian in melee. He stayed engaged unless Brian or Charles hit him, and then he would change targets for the next round. So, for instance, he smacked Brian in the first round, missed the bite. Charles hit him, and then the next round he swiped and bit and mauled Charles. Right? He turned on the one that caused him damage. Right? So that's just how I handled targets. So random target, but if somebody actually hit it or engaged it and caused damage, I would switch targets in melee, right? And they had only 3 or 4 rounds of that combat before they were able to knock it unconscious. So this was a Werebeast, but it was a Werebeast I made. It did a set amount of damage. Its claws did 1 damage. Its bite did 2 damage plus potential infection. They would have to make a save some point after the combat. And I set that as a set amount of damage. So it was really not like a werewolf. It wasn't like some epic beast. It was a man that had been affected by a minor werebeast, right? And a smaller type of beast. So it was ferocious and dangerous for level 1, but it was ultimately doable. They just couldn't kill it. They could only incapacitate it unless they had silver or magical weapons, etc. So anyway, I want to talk about that. MMM, right? Missile, magic, move, melee. And again, because we differentiate missiles from melee, once you're in melee, you can use your bow or your crossbow as a club, but you're not going to get to use it as a ranged weapon, right? And there'll be people out there going, of course you can. Well, you're watching, I mean, anybody who's been engaged in an actual fisticuffs knows You're too busy trying not to get punched in the face or kicked in the groin or taken to the ground. Or if it's a sword and a shield, you don't want to get cut up. You are not trying to, unless you have a gun, you might be trying to shoot it. But in this grand sense of what this means as a mechanical device, it is a difference, right? Even though people can make an argument, I could shoot my bow if somebody tried to jump me. Okay, well, again, for game purposes, rules is written, it is important, and it becomes more fun, right? As we recognize the danger of getting caught in melee if you don't want to be in melee, or if you want to flee, right? They don't get a free attack, they get their normal melee round attack. You just don't get one as you're evacuating combat. And if you do that properly, it doesn't get the sense that they get 2 attacks, bang, bang, right? Because we're fleeing from combat. The goblins then get to make all their attacks. Then we roll initiative for the second round. Okay, actually, I think in this we don't. Actually, I was rolling initiative every round because I wanted that dynamism of who's going first. Then it would be, again, missile, where any goblin that would have a weapon ready could shoot it at them as they flee. Then it would be magic. If any goblin sorcerer wanted to cast magic on them as they were fleeing, then we go to flee. Whoever wins initiative makes that flee, right? And so they're able to flee, but then we're rolling for pursuit or morale, right? And then of course melee if they're unable to outrun the goblins, so to speak, right? And if we do that, we don't have this confusion, we don't have this chaos, right? And it does matter to me. I mean, I think it makes the gamey portion of the games more interesting, right? The other stuff, the role-playing stuff, the stuff that we do that isn't mechanical, that isn't combat, well, that stuff can be at some level chaotic, right? All right, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.